All right, who has kids in the audience? Hands up if you have kids. Right, who knows these books? Yeah, that's Not My Train. Yeah, my daughter had one called That's Not My Fairy. Honestly, I'm not into gender stereotyping at all. It is the one that she wanted and she liked. When I look at my LinkedIn feed quite often, it kind of reminds me of these books. And one of the things I wanted to do, so I thought I'd take the opportunity today, is to do That's Not My Agile. Its batch size is too large. And basically, this talk is an hour of this. No, it's not, but let's kick off. That's not my Agile. Its time box is too long. That's not my Agile. Its customer is not on site. That's not my Agile. Its tests are too slow. That's not my Agile. Its backlog is too long. That's not my Agile. Its picture is way too big. Oh, I thought that one might get a bigger laugh. Okay. Was that too subtle? Okay. That's not my Agile. Its team has too many people. Or too few people, depending on who you're talking to. Let's try this one. That's not my Agile. Its velocity is normalized. Okay, all right. Is Dad down in the room? That's not my Kanban board. It has an expedite lane. Bit niche. And then there were some weird conversations last night. That's not my Agile. Its cheese and pineapple are on the sticks the wrong way round. Okay, that's for Stuart. And then this one's for JP. I'll just finish it myself. Really niche. That's not my Agile. Its Hasselhoff is not recursive. So, I forgot to stop my timer. So yeah, lots of people talking about Agile. We have the panel at the end of the day, like what's the future Agile? People arguing, is Agile dead? Is Agile alive? Does Agile need revitalizing? Does Agile need rewilding? Does Agile need reimagining? All these things. I was chatting with Jose about this talk. He actually kind of got in touch with me because he was trying to find a video from Jean Baker. She came and did a talk at the BCS in 2009, based on, I think it was like Starting With Why. It was based on Simon Sinek's book. And then only just a couple of weeks ago, this tweet came up in my timeline as a memory. This was Lean Kanban 2009. So this was the very first Kanban conference in Miami. And it's obviously stuck with me, where Jean said we should focus on an organizational change, not on Lean and Agile. And I just thought, wow, 15 years ago, Jean was saying it's not about Agile, it's about organizational change. And here we are 15 years later, still arguing about Agile. So what I thought I'd do today is tell you what Agile is, basically, and let's have a good argument about Agile. Also just thought it was a great way. We lost Jean 2016, I think, so I know a few people of you in here knew her, so I thought this was a nice way of just bringing her memory into the room, and I hope I can do her justice. So this is what I want to talk about: outcome-oriented, continuous transformation, engaging everyone, everywhere. So this is my Agile. When people talk to me about Agile and ask me what I mean by Agile now, this is generally the sort of phrase I'll use. So I want to basically dig into this a little bit more, talk about some tools, practices, models that I find useful in doing this. And one of the bits of that is, for me, I call it Agile is pluralistic. Agile is many things. Agile isn't one thing. There's no point in arguing about what Agile isn't, because there's so many ways of looking at it. So first off, I say doing Agile is a tactic. Okay? If we want to be Agile, we have to do Agile. So there's Agile practices and techniques and things that we have to do, but doing Agile, on its own isn't enough. So we need to be Agile as well. So I say being Agile is evidential. If we're doing Agile, if we're doing the right tactical things, then we should be seeing good outcomes. Those outcomes are evidence that our tactics are working. But then, even if we're kind of getting good Agile outcomes, we want to have agility. So having agility is strategic. So having agility is using agility to help us make good decisions, good choices, not just about the practices we use, but about the products we're building and the features we're building and all those sorts of things. But even so, we need to do all that in order to meet our aspirations. So are we getting the results we want to get? And even that should be guided by a true north. So what direction do we want to go in? What's the thing that's guiding us ultimately? So I'm going to basically kind of run through some of these things in a little bit more detail. If you kind of go through those backwards, true north, aspirations, strategy, evidence, tactics, you get a nice little acronym taste. As I said, you need all of those things. And Mike Burrows introduced me to the idea of wholehearted. So part of his work on agenda shift, he came across this quote from Christopher Alexander. So Christopher Alexander, kind of more well known for the patterns movement. He wrote a book on architectural patterns. Software development community took that idea for software patterns. A thing is whole according to how free it is of inner contradictions, when it is at war with itself and gives rise to forces which act to tear it down. It is unwhole. The more free it is of its own inner contradictions, the more whole and healthy and wholehearted it becomes. So I think if we have no contradictions with our Agile between the tactics, the evidence, the strategy, the aspirations, the true north, all those things are free of their inner contradictions, then we can have a wholehearted Agile. So hopefully that's what we're trying to get to. That's what I'm trying to get to anyway, wholehearted Agile. So let's start with outcome-oriented, and what I mean by that. And it's shifting from implementation to impact. So outcome is one of those words that can mean many things. And I see people talking about outcomes, and I think you're not talking about outcome, you're talking about a solution. A solution for me is not an outcome. You're just implementing something you've already decided to implement. And I want to shift to impact. And we need to do that because we don't really know. We can't tell what solutions we need. So this is a model, Powell talked about Stephen Bungay yesterday, great book, The Art of Action. He has his model called directed opportunism. So you want to start with outcomes. To deliver those outcomes, you put plans together, those plans turn into action, and then the actions lead to the outcomes. Nice and easy. The only problem is you have these gaps that he calls, gaps as he calls them, between outcomes and plans is the knowledge gap, the difference between what we would like to know and what we actually know. We don't know what to do to achieve our outcomes most of the time. So we need to close the knowledge gap. And then between plans and actions, the alignment gap, the difference between what we want people to do and what they actually do. So we can have the most perfect plan, and people will mess it up. They'll not follow it. They'll do something different. So that's the alignment gap. And then even if they put our perfect plan into perfect action, there's the effects gap, the difference between what we expect our actions to achieve and what they actually achieve. So we think it's the perfect plan, people put it in action, it's still not going to give us the right outcomes, potentially, because we still don't know things. So Stephen Bungay kind of go in a lot of detail about how to close these gaps, but the main one is this knowledge gap, the first one. Don't try and start with plans, start with intent. So for me, outcome-oriented transformation is starting with the intent. What is the intent of our transformation? Who knows this quote? So essentially, okay, I have one person, really? Nobody knows this? I'll give you a clue. It's not Taylor Swift, but it's close. This is Anna from Frozen 2. So this is sometimes called the Frozen 2 change strategy, or doing the next right thing. So I assume everyone that's got kids has seen the film. Anna's stuck. She doesn't know what to do. She sings this beautiful song, and it's all about doing the next right thing. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in this situation, but I'm just going to take a first step. So for outcome-oriented transformation, because we don't know what to do, what can we do? Let's just do the next right thing. So you have to act in the present. Understand where you are, and just take that first step and see what happens. The slightly more technical name for this is what Dave Snowden calls the vector theory of change. So theory of change for complex systems. So complex systems, you don't know, you can't predict how the system's going to work, so you can't define a solution. So you have to act in the present. So identify a desired direction to move in collaboration with community members. We'll come back to that. That direction is decided by deciding what you want more of in a dispositional landscape and then amplifying that. What that means is dispositional landscape is what direction are you moving in, what direction do you want to move in. So if your organization is moving in the wrong direction, you need to change its disposition. So that's changing the complex system. So that's a vector-based target. So vector is the direction that we want to go in. In contracts, a typical theory of change approaches involves setting explicit goals that are often used as metrics. So that's the idea of let's set a future state, close the gap, and we'll kind of base our success on the metrics based on the future state. So vector theory of change, setting a direction, that's the approach to outcome-oriented. This is a nice little canvas to get started. So Jay Bloom came up with this. There's you can kind of get at it from the link at the bottom. Start off with your present mess. And this is based on some language of Ackoff. So Ackoff talks about messes. Messes, they're like the interaction and the all your problems kind of bundled together is your mess. So he describes this as your present mess. And there's good stuff and there's bad stuff. So talk about, and this is like understand where you are now, get some situational awareness. Then talk about your future mess. So if you don't do anything now, if you don't do anything to change anything, what mess are you going to end up in? Like how bad things are going to go. So talk about what direction, this is basically what direction do you not want to go in. Then you can talk about your ideal future, or Ackoff is more about the idealized future. What do you want to be different? So if things get better and if you make some like systemic change, what would be different compared to where you are now and compared to that future mess? And then you can kind of go, okay, well, what do we need to do in the present? What can we need to do which is going to deal with the future mess, deal with the present mess, avoid the future mess, and take us towards our ideal future? Really simple exercise, sticky notes, get people to kind of collaborate on it. And that will help you probably have a conversation which takes you towards identifying your true north. So that true north is the direction you want to go in. True north is, it's not a destination, so it's not an implementation. So does anybody, any kind of hikers or orienteers or people in the room? No? So, one, okay, good. Hopefully you'll, because I'm not, so hopefully you'll corroborate this. When you're navigating and you're kind of using a compass, and basically the compass is pointing you towards your true north, your end goal is not to get to the North Pole. You're not trying to get to magnetic north. It's just giving you a direction. The other metaphor that sometimes people use, John Cutler uses this, is the North Star. I'm pretty certain when you're navigating by North Star, the North Star isn't your destination. I'm fairly confident in saying that. So for me, a true north has these kind of three aspects. It is concrete, like the true north is, the North Star is, and the magnetic north, it's something real. So it's concrete enough such that you can kind of picture it, you can imagine it. So, being the best isn't a good true north. Like, what does that mean? So it should be concrete enough that you can kind of imagine it, picture it. It's compelling. It's something that you want to do, and people should want to, we want to work on that. That's good. I like the sound of that. But it's also challenging. So it's not going to be really easy. It's something probably, that you're not going to do. A bit like the North Star, the true north. You're never going to get there. You don't even want to get there. But by making it challenging enough, it means that you're not going to get there. So it just avoids it becoming an end state or a solution. So I worked with one team, and their North Star, their true north, was something around like near instantaneous deployment of code from customer request. Like this idea that the customer says, I want this, you kind of go tap, 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 run some tests, hit deploy, or hit commit, and it's live. Now, there's a few organizations that might be able to do that. For most organizations, that's really, really challenging. But it's concrete. I think, I could imagine us being able to do that with a lot of work, and that would be amazing if we could do that, so it was compelling. I like this phrase at the bottom as well, who you want to be, not what you want to do. So I think this phrase comes, I'm trying to do a bit of research to where it comes from. I think it's like life coaching, personal development. So if you're going to personal development, don't kind of define yourself by what training courses you want to go on. Define yourself by who you want to be as a person and what you want to achieve. So I kind of like that as a way of thinking about true north as well. So you kind of craft a true north statement, that starts giving you a sense of direction, and that's going to help you decide when we're making decisions about our transformation, is that taking us towards our true north, or is that taking us away from our true north? The other side of then is aspirations. Pavel mentioned Don Reinertsen as well. I don't think he mentioned exactly how many principles there are in the book. There's 175 principles-ish. There might be like plus or minus a few. But 175 principles, this is the very first one in the book. Principle of quantified overall economics. Select actions based on quantified overall economic impact. So I kind of tie this back to aspirations. I think it's useful to have an idea of what success is going to look like in a kind of reasonably quantified way. It's not a target. We don't want to be a target, but what's the other way I'll describe it is what's the size of our ambition? So what are the results we hope to achieve? So if we're moving towards our true north, and we're kind of getting close, what value should we see? So there's a nice little model that Black von Swarming, again, the website here, just some different ways of thinking about value. So I don't think the aspirations are literally these, but I kind of find these ways of starting to have a conversation around what does value mean for us, what might our aspirations be. So increasing revenue, generating new customers. So what is revenue? How do we generate revenue? What's our economic model behind the revenue? Is it number of product sales, number of customers, number of return visitors, number of transactions, etc. So increasing revenue. Maintaining revenue is more about keeping customers. So we already have some revenue. Let's make sure we don't lose that. So customer churn, for example. If you have high customer churn, that means you're losing revenue. So do we want, can we talk about our aspirations in terms of customer churn? Decreasing cost is more about generally operational efficiency, automation, things like that. So just balancing out the revenue side and then avoiding cost. Decreasing cost is decreasing costs that were currently occurring. Avoiding cost is costs that we have not yet occurred and we don't want to occur. So the kind of classic example is some kind of regulatory fine. If we don't release by a particular date, we're going to get fined by the regulators. We want to avoid that. So maybe that's our measure of success at the end of the year. So those are kind of some ways of thinking about economic impact. So if we have a good true north that everybody is kind of bought into and likes, and we've kind of got some idea of our aspirations, we now have a sense of direction. We can be outcome oriented. We then move into continuous transformation. So this is thinking about change not as a one-off project. We're going to transform to Agile, and then we're done. And once we're done, we can get rid of all our coaches. I've had quite a few conversations with organisations recently where they said, yeah, we did that, and we realised we need to get our coaches back in again. So continuous transformation is just ongoing. It's just part of the business. I don't personally have a problem with the word transformation. Some people kind of go, oh, transformation. It's like, to me, it's more about, let's recognise that actually transformation is okay, but it's just continuous. So add that qualifying word on there. Which means effectively, for me, that means transformation is strategic. And strategy is continuous. You don't have an organisation that kind of go, well, we've met our strategy, we're done. Like, strategy is constantly changing. So strategy tends to be emergent. So this is a model from Mintzberg and some colleagues in his book Strategy Safari. You can have an intended strategy. So this is what our strategy is. This is what we're going to intend with it. And you deliberately deploy or execute on that strategy. And strategy is perfect strategy, so that strategy is realized. Okay. How often does that happen? Not very often. Normally it just becomes unrealized. And it kind of gets washed away, and well, let's just start again next year. So the other model that I think Mintzberg prefers is what he calls emergent strategy. So emergent strategy is just looking at all the things that are going on in the organization and spotting the patterns and kind of saying, oh, all these things seem to be working together. All these things seem to be producing positive results. These things are interesting. Let's double down on those things. So that might be, technology, seeing a new technology emerge and kind of go, oh, that's interesting. That could be useful. Or it could be a new market or a new kind of product or feature set. So you don't try and predict it up front. Just, situational awareness, interacting with your market, with your customers, getting feedback and spotting the interesting things and allowing those things to emerge. And that's going to happen continuously then. Because new things will be constantly emerging, and there's some things that you may focus on that suddenly you kind of say, actually, we should need to pivot. So if we're talking about strategy, we have to talk about RUML. So what makes a good strategy? Because go into a lot of organizations, and definitely what RUML will call bad strategy, platitudes, fluff, wishful thinking, being the best. Our strategy is to be the number one in our market. Great. What does that mean? What are you going to do? How's that going to help you make decisions? So RUML talks about diagnosis, guiding policies, and coherent action. So diagnosis is like what problem we were trying to solve. What's our challenge? He has a new book called The Crux. Not read it yet, but I've heard it kind of builds on this, but it's like that book is about what's the crux of the problem. If there's one thing we need to work on, what is that thing? So that's diagnosis, the critical challenge or opportunity that we're facing. And then in order to address that diagnosis, we put some guiding policies in place. So our general approach to addressing that challenge. So how are we going to decide what we should do or should not do in order to try and fix the challenge that we've diagnosed? And then those guiding policies allow you to decide coherent action. Coherent being the key word. Action that is coherent to our guiding policies that is going to resolve the thing we discovered in our diagnosis. A lot of strategy is just action, not even coherent action. It's just like, let's do stuff. And for me, Agile is more about the guiding policies that help us decide what our Agile practices are in transformation and that are addressing a diagnosis. There's a lot of transformation is just like, why are we doing Agile? What problem are we trying to solve? Don't know, it's just we think we should be Agile. So if you go back and look at the manifesto, for me, the manifesto is a statement of guiding policies, effectively. And so I wasn't there. Should have asked Alistair this last night, as Alistair Coburn was out for dinner last night with a few of us, and I should have asked him, what was your diagnosis? But I think they had a diagnosis around making software more humane for people, and improving, empowering software developers to build the right thing in the right way and that sort of thing. But those 4 statements, to me, are kind of guiding policies. They said we should focus on these things: individual interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. And then all the different methods and practices and tools and techniques become coherent action that are coherent with the manifesto as a set of guiding policies that are addressing the diagnosis of the people who were there at the time. Now, that's not to say just take these and make these your strategy statements, because they might not be the right ones for your diagnosis of your problem in your situation. Also, top statement, we are uncovering better ways of developing software. I like to think over the last 20-odd years that we have discovered some better ways, and maybe there's some better ways of articulating Agile as well. So a really nice exercise I like to do with people is kind of, you introduce the manifesto, then kind of go, if we're going to write our own Agile manifesto, what would it be? We're not replacing it, we're just contextualizing it and saying, for our diagnosis, what things should we focus on? And that leads you to your own strategic statements. So going back to this idea of gap thinking, so kind of how do you do this? You're not doing this big step. So this is the kind of the implementation and jumping straight to a solution is what we can call gap thinking. Jay Bloom kind of talks about what he calls present thinking. So this is Jay, the same guy that did the present thinking canvas. So these two are related. You still have your current state, but instead of trying to take this big step towards a future implementation, you take a small step to make your current state an ideal current state. What small thing can you do to make today better, rather than what big thing can you do to make tomorrow better? And that's guided by your intent, so your direction, your true north. And then that ideal state becomes your new current state, and you repeat. What small thing can we make our new current state better, and the next ideal current state, and so on. So you just get into this path, similar to, if you're familiar with Toyota Carter, similar idea to that. Small steps that you can make, and then you just get into, you just carry on walking. And it becomes continuous. And you can change direction if you need to, and maybe you get somewhere and you kind of go, yeah, this is good, this is a good place to be. But you don't stop, you kind of go, okay, well, where do we want to go next? So maybe you meet your aspirations, you just reset your aspirations, reset your true north. So that idea of present thinking, I think, is really useful. But still, if you're taking small steps, how do you know whether you're moving towards your intent? So that's what I talk about in terms of being agile, being evidential. So you probably still need some outcomes, some intermediate outcomes, some leading indicators that are going to indicate that you are making progress and heading in the right direction. So I think I saw Joanna sitting in the back. Joanna kind of referenced this. Troy McGinnis's 6 dimensions. I generally kind of fall back on this. I want my leading indicators to be outcomes still, but they're more short-term outcomes. And I like this idea of like, well, outcomes in terms of value. How can we decide, like, are we delivering more value? We might not have met our aspirations, but are we starting to deliver more value? Are we being more productive? Are we being more predictable? Are we being more responsive? Is quality improving? Are we being more sustainable? You probably need a mix of those so you don't end up obsessing on one, because if you focus too much on productivity, there's a significant chance your quality is going to drop because you're just chucking out lots of crap really quickly. So you want to have these things balancing each other. And also I kind of like this model because it kind of, in your context, what does productivity mean? There's actually, productivity is not a good one because I think productivity is throughput. But maybe quality. What does quality mean? Like, is it escape defects? Is it customer support calls? Is it uptime or downtime? So, you can have a conversation about what does quality mean for us? How are we going to measure that? And then we can kind of say, as we go through our transformation, are these things improving? Are these things heading in the right direction? So how are you going to measure this? And measures, evidence, not targets. So I kind of like the idea of it's just evidence. Well, and also, a lot of this stuff, it doesn't have to be quantified. It could be kind of qualified as well. So could be just, what behaviors are we seeing? What stories are we hearing? Are we hearing better, more good stories and fewer bad stories? And then tactics. So actually, what are we going to do? What coherent action are we going to take? And who am I to kind of go, all right, these are the tactics you're going to use? So this is a kind of little model I came up with, again, based on work from Dave Snowden, the idea of kind of putting some triangles together, typologies. So differentiating between a typology and a taxonomy. So a taxonomy is like classification, like this practice fits in this box. I don't think that's useful, but a typology is a set of things which like stimulate thinking and stimulate broader thinking, so kind of encourage creativity. So you've got these 2 triangles, process, people, plexus. You'll probably discover this, I kind of like my alliteration. Plexus is just a fancy word for network. So the idea is you've kind of got some social tactics on this side, and then you've got some technical practices, technical ideas on the other side. On the social side, you've got processes, people, plexus, so how people are organized, what people we have and what skills they have, kind of what processes they're using and how are they interacting. And then the technical side, you've got, specifically, technical practices, probably TDD, those sorts of things. You've got the products we're building and maybe the platforms we're building or the platforms we're using. You could probably fit any practice somewhere in that. So the idea is taking that, kind of going, what can we do? What coherent action can we take? And there's a really broad spectrum of what possibilities there are. So what you end up doing is effectively running experiments. So each of those stall steps becomes an experiment. It's like, let's try a tactic. Let's see whether there's evidence that this tactic works. And each of those tactics becomes a hypothesis. We think if we try to do this thing differently, it's going to result in this evidence, and that's going to help us meet our aspirations and take us towards our true north. So small safe-to-fail tests to learn about improvements, which improvements are technologically and operationally feasible. So there need to be small experiments. So a lot of organizations are like, okay, yeah, what we want to do is lean portfolio management. Like, whoa, that's never going to fit with where we are now. So what small thing we can do which might take us towards the idea of lean portfolio management, but jumping straight towards a big lean portfolio management is usually, certainly operationally not feasible. Too big a step. So they need to be technologically and operationally feasible, or we might discover which ones are not from those many adjacent possibilities. So the adjacent possibilities, there's many things we could do to make today better. Let's pick the ones to try. Let's see whether they work or not. And if they're going to work, we do more of them. If it doesn't work, we can dampen it down, do less of it. So continuous transformation is basically continuous experimentation. And once you get into that idea of just running experiments, are the experiments working, are things getting better, you can start moving towards the outcomes you want to get to. The last piece, engaging everyone everywhere. So this is, I kind of think of this shifting from a few people designing the transformation to everybody in the organisation being involved in this. So rather than privileging a few people that kind of go, you're the experienced people, you're the consultants, can you tell us, can you design a blueprint for us? And then we'll just roll it out. Let's actually just engage everyone everywhere in the organisation, get their information, get their feedback. So this is what I call strategy deployment. And this is the way I define strategy deployment. Any transformation approach where the solutions emerge from the people closest to the problem. So rather than having a central group both define the problem and define the solution, central group is probably going to do that diagnosis piece. I mean, they're going to still do that collaboratively and go out and engage people in it, but they're going to go, okay, we think this is the big thing we need to do. That's the problem. But then go and okay, everybody, how do we solve this? What do we do? What ideas do you have? What are you experiencing that you can kind of that we can use to inform some ideas to run some experiments? And this is essentially what the lean world calls catchball. So catchball, collaborative process to translate organizational strategy into the daily tactical work. But it's not, again, it's not the top of the organization kind of going, here it is, just go off and do this. Catchball is this metaphor of just throwing ideas around the organization. Literally, it's as really simple as that. And somebody will kind of take an idea, I'm going to catch it, I'm going to reflect on it, like, oh, that's interesting, how does that match my experience? I might kind of make some suggestions and improve it, and then I'm going to pass it on, either pass it back, and I'll go, here's my feedback, or I might pass it on to a different bit of the organization. So that's kind of how we engage the organization, by throwing these ideas around. It's another model, so I just picked this up last week in Agile Manchester. So Jason Yip blogged about it, but it was someone called Leah Rose Connor, who I think was actually, I think she was in Spotify, so I don't know whether, Gita, do you know Leah from your Spotify days? No, obviously not. Apparently she kind of came up with this model around communication. So she says most communication is just like we transmit it. And we transmit it once and we assume that everybody hears it, understands it, and can do the right thing with it. So actually you need to check that it's been received. And once it's been received, you need to check that it's been understood. And you need to check that the people actually agree with it. And you need to check that they're able to convert that into action. We usually stop at the top. You need to work all your way down. And I thought that's interesting because that, to me, is kind of describing back briefing. So back briefing is something else that Stephen Bungay writes about in Art of Action. It comes from the military, the idea that when you're giving a group of people a mission, you're giving them a mission brief. And what you want to make sure is that you're not just kind of transmitting that brief, you're making sure that they've heard it, they've understood it, they agree with it. They're going to convert it into action appropriately. So you basically get them to brief back to you their understanding, what they heard, do they understand the intent, what are they going to do with that information, what are their plans, and then you can kind of go, yeah, we think you understood it well, or hang on, what's going on, why are you doing that? There's some interesting examples of where this hasn't happened. And this kind of ties into the idea of the curse of knowledge. When we're kind of explaining things to people, there's all this stuff in our head that we just kind of assume that everybody else knows is going on, and they don't. So they're missing a whole load of context that's up here. Charles of the Light Brigade, famously, Lord Raglan was kind of sitting up on the hills, looking down on the battlefield, went, right, what we need to do is those guys need to go over there. Send a message to those guys over there. So they sent a message down. The team looked at these messages and went, that doesn't really make sense. Well, that's what we've got to do. Instead of going that way, they went that way. Because they didn't have this big context of the whole battlefield, or what left or right was, or so basically the instructions missed context, and that's why the Charge of the Light Brigade turned into such a disaster, because Lord Raglan had the curse of knowledge. He knew all this stuff, and the people that received the instruction didn't. So for me, back briefing is a nice way of doing that, and another A3, so I like A3s. It gives you a way of kind of saying, if I'm going to ask you to do something, take away this A3, fill it in a nice, concise way, and bring it back, and let's talk about, does it make sense? How can we improve it? So, and the this A3 then becomes the part of the catchball of kind of what we're throwing around, what we're kind of passing around. So it has the brief, the work, kind of the tactic that we kind of ask people to go and work on. Have they not have I described it well, but have they understood it sufficiently? And do I have confidence? So we're not just kind of asking people to go off and self-organize and be empowered, and then discover that, oh, hang on, they've got enough, like, it's been a disaster. We want to have kind of a bit of a safety check in there. So that leads us to the X matrix. So this is the kind of the last A3. This is the thing, this is my favorite thing that I wish more people knew about. It brings together all these things. So we have the true north in the middle, and the true north informs our aspirations. And meeting our aspirations are enabled by our strategies. Our strategies are implemented by our tactics. Our tactics should generate evidence, and that evidence should be evidence of achieving our aspirations. So this is kind of that wholehearted idea. We want all these things to fit together without any contradictions. Sitting down with a group of people, coming up with all these elements is generally quite easy. Having that conversation about, are these things coherent? So this is why it's an X matrix, and you've got this X of matrices in the corner where we can talk about, are all these things coherent with each other? Is there a reasonable correlation between them, and is there a kind of good contribution? There's not a kind of one-to-one causality in there. These things it's the idea of messy coherence. So it ends up looking like this. So this is kind of a very simplified and kind of NDA'd example. So this is that instantaneous development and deployment true north I talked about. Set of aspirations, some strategies, tactics, productivity, and then you fill in some dots in the corners. So this one up in the top left, it's a solid dot, which means I think there's some strong or direct correlation between cross-skilling as a tactic. So we're going to invest in some cross-skilling of our people. We think that has a strong direct correlation between improving flow, because we're going to improve skills liquidity. And more people are going to be able to pick things up because they're cross-skilled, so people aren't waiting for the experts. So I think that's going to improve flow. Down at the bottom, let's look at this one, where it's a kind of an empty dot. There's some sort of correlation in there, but it's weak. It's indirect. So flow may help us to decrease the number of defects. But, okay, it's not direct, but probably if the work's going out better, we're going to get quicker feedback. Work's not going to be hanging around. Probably we've got reduced work in process. So we think it's going to help on quality, but there's not a direct one. Now, the beauty of this is, you can completely disagree with that, and we can have a conversation about it, and that's quite often what happens. The conversations around whether people agree or disagree on how these things correlate to each other, help us refine our understanding about what we mean by our aspirations, our strategies, etc. So that creates the alignment. So the book, I've got a reference to it later. There's a book that talks about the X matrix. There's a quote. I'm going to paraphrase it now. It's the conversations that are had that generate the alignment, not the piece of paper. So piece of paper is great, but you could throw away the X matrix, and actually the conversations you've had in generating it is the really powerful thing. So you end up with this kind of nested PDSA. So this is how you engage everybody. Everywhere. You start off with this big PDSA, and that may be your X matrix, but these are big hypotheses. You're not changing your strategy every couple of days. You're maybe changing your strategy every year. So to get quick feedback on that, you start doing a kind of another PDA cycle within that, and that's kind of what I think about back briefing. So you start implementing your tactics, and then your tactics convert into another set of PDSA cycle, which is where you're doing your experiments. So you have kind of your big picture and your kind of potentially your leadership teams that's more involved in the X matrix. They're not doing it in isolation. But then they give briefs out, back briefing, and then that goes down to the people at the work that can do the experiments, and that all feeds back, and that's how the emergent strategy works, because the people that are down there doing the experiments might kind of go, this doesn't make sense, or this isn't going to work, or this isn't working. So you get this kind of think of it as ebb and flow. So you're kind of asking these three questions. Where are we now? So that's situational awareness, that's kind of preparing of kind of understanding this current situation in the organization, in the market, the technology landscape. Where are we heading? So setting our outcomes. some initial planning, but also piloting. So piloting like steering, piloting a boat. So just kind of adjusting course because we're drifting off, or we've kind of discovered an obstacle that we now need to kind of work our way around. And then what are our next steps? That kind of idea of pivot, pull, persevere. So where do we need to change because we've learned something new and interesting? Or was there something that we were doing that isn't working that we might want to pause? Or actually something's working and we want to persevere with it. And these things are kind of, there's a constant back and forth between these things. So it's not like a nice, simple process that we're going to put in place. You're going to have some cadence around it. You're probably going to do your planning roughly once a year, but let's not be limited to that. Sometimes you might discover some information, and I've had this in the past, where you just need to go back and replan because the feedback and the information you learned was, we got it wrong. So, 5 minutes to wrap up, I think. So, outcome-oriented, continuous transformation, engaging everyone, everywhere. Kind of that's the little catchphrase that I hope is buzzing in your head now for the rest of time. But what do you do? So, again, this isn't something that you can just go off and, oh, great ideas, I'm going to go off and implement the X matrix and all these things around it. You have to kind of take small things. So another little quote, can I find that every now and again when you're reading a book, a paragraph or a sentence just jumps out at you that you're not expecting. This was the one from Strategy Safari. The best way to manage change is to allow for it to happen, to set the conditions whereby people will follow their natural instincts to experiment and transform behaviors. So what's the first little thing? How can you create the conditions such that people can be a little bit more outcome-oriented? Your transformation could be a little bit more continuous. You can start engaging more people in the organization, everyone, everywhere. Small steps, and it's about changing the environment. It's not about kind of going, right, I've got a brand new change strategy, let's implement that. It's kind of like, it's like doing an agile transformation in a waterfall way. I probably don't have time to go into this, but I thought I'd throw it in there. There's this great paper, again, this was referenced by Mintzberg's book. Eisenstadt, Specht, and Beer wrote this paper. They were peers of Kotter in the same university and wrote it at the same time. This like why change programs don't produce change, and they came up with these 6 steps. If only this had become popular and Kotter hadn't. For some reason, Kotter with his 8 steps, maybe it's because he had 8 steps. More steps, it must be better. But to me, this is kind of describing a little bit about my approach to change. It's like engaging people, giving people a sense of direction, getting people involved in the change. None of this like, scare people with a burning bridge. These are the books I've referenced. Ocean Cannery is the book about the X Matrix, Art of Action, Strategy Fury. Agenda Shift is Mike Burry's book. He's not written his wholehearted book yet, so I had to throw that one in. But Agenda Shift includes like brilliant, it's very aligned with a lot of the things I've talked about and introduces a lot of other exercises, techniques that you can do to do that. Getting the right thing to burn, strategy deployment talks a lot about more about A3s in there. Idealized design and kind of Ackoff's idea about being outcome-oriented, and then Rummel's good strategy, bad strategy. So if you've read all those by the end of the day, great. Let's come and talk about it. So I guess one of my motivations here, and this is kind of what I hope you can get out of this, is people familiar with the idea of organizational change. It's like the new thing we're going to do. It's yet another agile transformation. If we can get outcome-oriented, continuous transformation where everybody, everywhere is engaged, we can make it organizational change further. People are excited about change. People are motivated by it. People have agency in that change. That's, I think, what we're trying to get to. So, there we go. That is my Agile. It's Ukti! I don't think that's going to catch on. And I discovered you can buy cushions with these things on as well. So, thank you very much.